Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We're excited to share with you that we have 2 upcoming Level 2 NARM therapist trainings beginning in May and in June. If you're a licensed mental health practitioner, we invite you to join us for either of these NARM therapist trainings. One training will take place in Austin, Texas, and the other training will take place live and online. This Level 2 training is designed to support mental health professionals who work with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Being trained in NARM, one of the first clinical models specifically designed to address ACEs and CPTSD, supports therapists to learn how to address the long-term impacts of adverse childhood experiences and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. If you're interested in this training, we encourage you to register now to reserve your spot. For more information about both upcoming trainings, please visit narmtraining.com/level 2. We look forward to you joining our growing international NARM community and are inspired to work with you to bring NARM to your clients and communities in order to transform trauma. Today, we'll be talking with Dr. Joanne Barron and Dr. Lynne Friedman-Gell. Dr. Joanne Barron is a licensed clinical psychologist practicing in Sherman Oaks, California. Dr. Barron holds a doctoral degree in clinical psychology and has over 40 years of experience in working with addictions in the mental health field. Dr. Joanne is passionate about treating patients with complex, developmental, and intergenerational trauma. Dr. Lynne is a clinical psychologist expertly trained in the treatment of addiction and trauma. Lynne received her PhD from the California School of Professional Psychology with advanced studies in psychodynamic therapy at the Wright Institute, Los Angeles. She also trained in infertility and reproductive issues in her postdoctoral work. At the center of her work is the mind-body-heart connection. Lynne provides therapy, teaching, supervision, and consultation. Doctors Lynne and Joanne have developed an integrative approach for trauma treatment incorporating mind, body, and emotion, and were co-founders of the Trauma and Beyond Psychological Center, an intensive specialized treatment program which provides day treatment and intensive outpatient services for clients with trauma and related disorders. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Joanne Barron and Dr. Lynne Friedman-Gell. All right, we are here with Dr. Joanne Barron and Dr. Lynne Friedman-Gell. Hello and welcome to the podcast. How are you both today?
Doing well, Emily. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Emily. Nice to be here today.
So I thought we'd start off our conversation very much like we would a NARM session. And so I'd like to ask you both, what would you like listeners to get out of our conversation today?
Good question. I think I would like listeners to get a better understanding of how trauma can be insidious and that sometimes people do not even realize that what they're suffering from, what their experience is in fact from the effects of early trauma. So I think that's really important to help people understand and also to let them know that healing is quite possible.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well, to really let them know that regardless of whether you remember your trauma or don't remember your trauma, because sometimes it's pre-verbal or sometimes it's blocked from memories, that we can work with that in trauma-informed therapy and in NARM and in the present moment in terms of the somatics and the emotions and the identifications and the integration of all of that.
I love that. I can already see you two are a great team. You really just support each other. And even just with that answer, I loved, Joanne, your use of the word insidious, because it truly is insidious and sneaky in that way. And so many folks aren't really aware of how that is. So thank you both for that. I think we're going to have a lovely conversation today. I'd love to dig in around what it is that you both do and how you're using NARM in your work. You have a book and you have your Trauma and Beyond Center and lots of cool things. So I'd love to hear from you what you're doing with NARM.
I'll go ahead and start speaking for myself, but also Joanne and I are so closely connected. I may be speaking for her too, but we started studying NARM with Larry in his very first cohort here in Los Angeles or in the United States. I think that was in 2012. So we've been studying NARM since 2012, year after year after year, because we just can't get enough of it. But now it has become integrated into the very way I think about clients, the way I think about myself, the way I work. And so NARM is just a fundamental part of an understanding because it's both a theory and a model, a technique. So really it weaves into every aspect of my therapy work and my understanding of clients. Although I do also integrate other modalities with NARM because I'm an attachment focused certified, well, we both are attachment focused certified EMDR therapist, as well as we've done some sensory motor psychotherapy studying and some trauma resource model. And we study with Alan Shore. So we integrate that together.
One of the things I love about NARM is that it does integrate so well with Dr. Shore's work, the interpersonal neurobiology. And it gives us a model or a roadmap, I think, often of how to use our knowledge of interpersonal neurobiology in the room and take it into clinical practice. The other thing I think that Lynne really talked about how we love NARM, both of us, and how we have studied with Larry in particular for years. But now we get a chance to bring it to our center. And in the training and teaching we do with our therapists, we have an incredibly talented team. We get to impart what we've learned to our therapists. And in that way, it's reflected in the work we do at Trauma and Beyond.
And I guess just to add that we've been blessed enough here in Los Angeles to be able to study both with Dr. Heller as well as Dr. LaPierre, Aileen. We've been lucky enough to study with both of them because they're local here. Yeah, NARM is a framework of understanding that's like primary in how I understand clients.
I love hearing how you're, just a little bit, how you're weaving so many different wonderful resources and models together in the work that you're doing. That's so fantastic. And I'm excited to dig in a little bit more. I'm curious how you're holding the term of complex trauma. I mean, you both shared in the beginning how clients can see that as insidious and that we're working in the present moment. So I'm curious how you hold, if you have a definition that you work with in terms of complex trauma, I'd love to hear.
Usually for me, when I think about complex trauma, I'm thinking about childhood trauma, early childhood trauma, the original wounding that happens in our primary relationships with our earliest caregivers, because that sets the tone of all of our future relationships, as well as our expectations and our own self-identity, as well as how we think about the world and we think about others. So if wounding goes back to those very, very early relationships, often this is just who we take ourselves to be, how we see ourselves. We often do not recognize that the feeling states that are problematic or the behavior that's problematic is something that we could change. We just take it as that's who I am. Mm-hmm. And so often clients come into our office or into our treatment center saying, no trauma. My childhood was happy. My childhood was wonderful. Everything was great. So we do work in the present moment, and we work with relational problems that they're having now, or self-image problems, or problems in the world, being stuck in whatever way. And unbelievably, most of the time we get back to the early childhood trauma that they may or may not remember. And I could talk more about that, but that goes into a whole other thing.
And to tag on to that, I think in my understanding of complex trauma, it develops in these repetitive over and over behaviors that are interactions, interpersonal interactions, that our clients end up developing these strategies to cope with and to protect themselves. And then both the strategies and the trauma become interwoven in the very beingness of that person. Sort of, if you will, of a personality disorder, which to me is complex trauma equals personality disorder. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, not always. But I mean, when I see somebody that's labeled in the old-fashioned personality disorder, you usually find complex trauma underneath that. I don't know when you wouldn't. So you always find that, I'd say. But I picture it almost like a DNA helio, and the trauma becomes just incorporated, and it's all tangled up together. And to me, the trauma work is like untangling all of that. and making it so that there can be a flow. Like there's a log jam in the river and it's all blocked up and we can't flow and grow and change because all the logs are jammed. And by separating them all out and working with them, working with not just the symptoms, but the underlying dynamics is the healing.
Absolutely. And I love that you highlighted we're not just working with symptoms, we're working with humans who have symptoms and what's underneath that. That's so important to understand. Yeah. Thank you. So I know that you both, well, maybe I should back up. I like want to get into the fact that you've worked with Larry for so many years, for over a decade or almost a decade. Is that right?
That's right.
I love that you have that history. I'd love to hear more about that. But I'm curious what led you both to working with complex trauma. How did you get into the field? What drew you to it?
Oh, my goodness. I have pretty much always been interested in working with complex trauma. First, both of us actually come from the addiction field. For many, many years, we both, in separate ways, have worked in the addiction field. And so just seeing over and over the trauma underneath the addiction and particularly in chronic relapsers, seeing people that just couldn't make the changes, couldn't adapt, and finding that trauma was underneath. And with that trauma, a sense of hopelessness, sometimes even a sense of, always a sense of shame. And do I even deserve to change? Do I even deserve to recover? So going into grad school, I knew that I wanted to study trauma. And that kind of was what I did my dissertation on and have just been studying ever since.
And I guess to add for me, I mean, because trauma when I was in graduate school wasn't a field of study. And so, and there wasn't, to my knowledge, a lot of somatic-based, attachment-based models being taught in graduate school. But when I got out and I was sort of advertising myself as working with body, mind, and spirit. And then I realized, wait a minute, I don't know how to work with the body. And so adding to that we also both, as we were working together in other capacities, realized, as Joanne said, the underlying issues of trauma that were fueling the strategy of addiction. And so when those two things combined, ironically, I received an email, like right when I was thinking about that, about the introduction of NARM. And I was like, hey, Joanne, look at this. And we both looked at it and we went to the intro in, someone's living room with Larry. And it was like exactly what we were missing in our ability to work with clients, that model orientation technique. So it was so synchronicitous that it came to us, just arrived in my email box.
Right. I love that.
And one other thing I'll add in my personal story is that my own trauma, I was attracted to healing trauma because as I was in school and attending workshops and hearing about trauma and not for many years, not understanding that I even had trauma, I was one of those that, no, that's just how my family was. It's not a big deal. But understanding the way that it had impacted me really interested me in learning more because as Dr. Lynne was saying earlier, I do believe that the healing is so deep that the trauma actually impacts our very core, our very DNA. And so it is not a quick fix. For some of us, it will be a lifetime of healing. And that's one of the things I really like to remind our clients of, that it's slow, that it's going to be slow, give yourself the time and the space that you need, and recovery will be at your own pace. It looks different for everyone.
And I like that, Joanne, that ongoing work, because part of what I love about NARM still is that there's ongoing work. I still might do a demo and be like, oh, let me work on this trauma a little bit more with my sister because more stuff came up.
Right.
And it's an ongoing work. And I think that's a very important for therapists to continue taking care of themselves and continue doing work and working with the therapist and the self-growth, even as a model unconsciously for our clients to know that work continues. It's not like you got to get it all at once. It comes as it comes up. And
Mhm.
so I think that's a beautiful part of NARM.
Indeed. I love the self-compassion that's available. I mean, I feel like in this space of where we're all just acknowledging this is, like you said, kind of a lifetime path we're all on. And we're not expecting to fix ourselves tomorrow or fix our clients. None of that is in the air. It's very much this just way of being of like, this is how we're moving through life and we're continuing this work. In fact, as you both were speaking, I felt a little bit emotional. My gratitude for the
Oh,
culture, the space that NARM provides to, us as clinicians, how important that is. It's not like we finish grad school and we do a training and then we're done with our own healing and we're,
right.
moving on to work with clients. It's like we're simultaneously doing that work. And I know that clients pick up on that. They
Yeah.
feel that we're kind of in the trenches there with them.
And as you were talking, what came to me, one of the other things I love so much about NARM is that we don't have an agenda. We
Yeah.
are not trying to fix our
Mhm.
clients. We are not in a power position where we know more than they do, or we are the healer. We are exploring together with them. We are compassionately holding a space and exploring and being curious together. And that took so much pressure off. And studying that model made me realize I do not have to work so hard. I don't have to know the answer to any of this. As a matter of fact, why would I know what's right or best or how this person is going to heal? It really taught me to listen in a different way, much more openly, just really being with the client. And I really think that there's so much healing in that. That when we
Mhm.
are just there and open and receptive to whatever the client brings, there's so much healing in that sacred space.
Yeah. Thank you both. That was, yeah, again, I'm just feeling a little bit emotional as I'm sensing into the gratitude of the work that we're doing and that so many are doing out in the world. So you both shared a little bit about what led you to working with complex trauma and what led you to NARM. I'm curious to hear more about how you're using NARM in your work, if that's okay to explore that.
Can I just tell a quick funny story?
Please. We love humor here.
If that's okay. Joanne and I were assisting Larry, I believe, in the very first training in Berkeley.
Yeah.
And we were standing there, and I said to her, I don't know, it just came to my head. I didn't want to forget it. I said to her, Joanne, we need to start a treatment program. This is such amazing, rich work. And you and I can only do so much and see so many clients. And there's so many clients who need NARM, who need this orientation, who need this work. We need to open a treatment program. And I could picture us in this, hotel venue with Larry, on a break and like, we've got to do this, Joanne. And so it's interesting how NARM integrates into our treatment program, Trauma and Beyond. And so when you asked, how we use NARM in our therapy, it made me think of how we use NARM also in our treatment program and how the idea even came to fruition in that way. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
I love that. And I love hearing this is one of the beauties of taking this role of hearing all the stories of how folks came to NARM and kind of like you talked about the synchronicity of I was just kind of ready for it and then it plopped on my doorstep or in my inbox
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
so common. I love hearing those stories because it does feel like synchronicity like
Yeah.
it's meant to be. But then that you had this idea and you thought we need to bring this to clients in a way and that you have so many clinicians that you're working with to bring this work. So you're multiplying, what's the word I'm looking for? You're multiplying your efforts in sharing this with other clinicians and bringing it to your center. So yeah, I don't know if there's any, I mean, maybe I'm being redundant in asking you this, but I really just want to hear more about how you're bringing this work.
one of the ways we bring it into the center as well with our therapists, with our clients, and in our private practices, as we are always giving away or asking clients not only to read our book, but to pick up Larry Heller and Eileen Lapierre's book on healing
Mhm.
developmental trauma. And it's a must for all of our therapists to have read that book. There's just so much wisdom in that book. And really, we give it away all the time.
To add to that, I guess, as we're doing our consultations with our therapy team,
Right.
we're coming like, as I said, this is like my base understanding of working with clients, the identifications, the shame, the pride-based responses, the strategies, the connection style, all of that is just in how I see a client. So it's how I form my hypotheses. And also how I work with a client, what would you like to work on today? So it's a model that frames my work, whether I pull in other things as well, it's still like the fundamental alphabet. And so it's in all my work. Now, particularly a client who comes to me because he or she has found us through the NARM practitioner referral base, they're actually coming in because they want, quote unquote, pure NARM. And so, I mean, it's such an elegant model. There really is no other reason to probably use other models, but there are times when something comes to me that I'm like, oh, I want to do some EMDR with that. Now, we can do it with NARM because you're moving from the cognitive to the emotional to the body. And so you're really naturally going right brain, left brain, right brain, left brain. So it really has its own bilateral stimulation just based on the work itself. But I hold all that in my consciousness.
Okay, that feels new to me. I feel like I'm like rearranging something internally. As you said, the bilateral, it's already offering that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think that with EMDR, we are obviously trying to get the bilateral stimulation going, but with NARM, we are working with the body and we are working with the person's identity and we are working with the thoughts and words. So in that way, when we're asking someone to go inside and to notice what's happening in their body, and then what was that like for you? So we're accessing on different levels, both right brain and left brain, both unconscious and conscious. And so the NARM model fits beautifully with EMDR. And what I've come to understand from some of the NARM trainings is that it purposely is trying to access all of these different levels, the cortex, the midbrain, the brainstem, all of these different levels, so that the trauma can be integrated, so that it can be just a part of us, but not taking the driver's seat, not the front seat. We're never going to lose or get rid of all of our trauma, but it can be just another part, another memory that's integrated in the same way as other memories so that it doesn't have such a big impact on our life and our heart.
And just to add to that, if I ask the client, and what are you experiencing? We're liable to get sensations, images, feelings, meanings. So that's right brain, left brain, right brain. It just happens naturally.
Okay, I so appreciate you teaching me that because I just haven't thought about it in that way, that we really are accessing this bilateral way of working. So thank you for sharing that with me. I also was curious if you have any, stories with clients that you're able to share of struggle or anything inspirational in working with complex trauma. I'd love to hear, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear.
I do, actually. This just happened last night. I have been working with a gentleman for, I don't know, several years now, 2 or 3 years. And he came to me begrudgingly. This man had a problem with sex addiction and had an affair, or had several affairs, and his wife now was demanding that he stay in therapy. He had gone to a treatment program, stopped the affairs. Now he's in therapy. For many years, out of the several years, I would come to Dr. Lynne and other supervisions and say, I'm so frustrated. I cannot get this person in touch with his body. He really just dissociates. He doesn't feel he's really not in touch. And through NARM, though, I was able to remember it's not my job to make anything happen. It's my job to just be with him and to explore this numbness, this detachment, to look at where he goes. And his stated goal of what he wanted during our sessions was that he wanted to learn how to become more emotionally connected to his wife. And so it's taken a long time, but he has finally come to the place where he is so vulnerable that he can recognize now that when his wife gets upset with him and pulls back, pushes him away, how painful that is for him, because that's exactly what happened with his mother. She was just, leave me alone. I am busy. Go play. Be by yourself. And that was so painful that for years he could not feel how painful it is when his wife rejects him, even in small ways. And that vulnerability now is allowing him to share that part of himself with his wife. And that sharing of the vulnerability is allowing him to be closer and actually ends up making him feel so much more connected. And so to watch this man describe this new connection with tears in his eyes, this man that couldn't feel, that was more likely to just not care and have affairs so that he didn't care about what was going on, to now being so close that it brings tears to his eyes, to me is just such a gift to be able to share and witness that kind of healing.
That is so beautiful.
Thank you, Joanne. I loved hearing that. The clients that came to my mind was actually a couple that came to me seeking NARM therapy, and they'd been referred to me looking for NARM. And it was actually a brief period of work that we did. It wasn't like long-term, like years, but they were both psychologically minded. They both were in individual therapy. And so using NARM with them and helping them really get a sense of the strategies that each one was using and how that strategy was interfering with the relationship and helping them develop both a sense of their own strategy and the roots of it, as well as helping the other understand with compassion and empathy where their partner was coming from. And as they both began to have this insight and this shift inside of how they were experiencing each other and that reenactment that happens from the childhood traumas, and he was able to see how she was reenacting his childhood trauma, and he saw how she reenacted his childhood trauma. And they were really able to sort of block that log jam and really see each other in the moment for who they each were, understanding their intentions towards each other rather than feeling judged and criticized and all of these painful feelings. They could really see it with more of an open heart. And it was a beautiful piece of work that they both grew from.
I love that. And you're really speaking to the relational part of NARM, right? And something I'm so interested in, especially in working with couples, exactly what you're naming, I love that about this model, that as one individual is doing their work, having their partner witness that work and having the compassion for the strategies. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful, that work. I appreciate you sharing that, Lynne. Anything else that you'd like to share in that way of, anything inspiring for you as a clinician too, or personally?
Well, can we share a minute about our workbook?
Yes, absolutely. I've been wanting to hear more.
Not just to be self-promoting, but it's been a real great accompaniment for our clients in our treatment program and individually, because it's an intergenerational trauma workbook that gives clients some psychoeducation and then an experience of writing about the intergenerational trauma, and then some exercises to help them soothe and calm and re-regulate. And we also recommend for more of the co-regulation aspect, like really working on this with a therapist. But it's really just added to our work, whether, with NARM and for our clients, because it's that workbook model for those clients who are interested in doing something more outside of therapy. Not that I would ever, like you have to do this, right? Because in NARM, we don't have to do anything,
Right.
so to speak. But I just think it's really worked well for us and our clients. And so I just wanted to add that that's an important thing for us.
What a great resource. And I'm thinking, I have newer clients that come to me and they know nothing about the work that I do or that I don't give homework. And they're like, okay, so what do I do this week? And so I always love to have kind of resources like that in my back pocket of like, especially if a client is working with some intergenerational patterns there, to be able to add that as a resource. And the self-reflection piece.
Well, and through NARM, you know that your parents bring what they bring, and they bring it from their parents, and they bring it from their parents. And so it also adds a cultural layer as well into the work that we're doing. And so whether you use a workbook or you just do it naturally, I mean, I think that's a really important part of NARM too, as well as including those cultural components that are part of the strategies and the shame and everything else that comes up, important too.
And I think one of the things that the workbook can help with is I think it can help with our clients to start to identify the strategies and to start to see how they started and where they picked up some of the ways that they are protecting themselves. So I think it's really helpful in those ways, as well as really helping people to be able to identify feelings, emotions, patterns that they maybe didn't really understand as reactions to. So it can be quite helpful for people that are already doing their work.
For sure. And you named two things that I myself have found to be so beneficial. Number one, just the identification of it. I've had the experience myself of being totally blind to a pattern.
Right.
And then when I see it, I can overwhelm myself with shaming myself.
Right.
But that second piece that you bring up of when we're able to identify like kind of the roots or the origin, that we can have so much more self-compassion because it makes sense. It's like, oh, well, my parents did that. My grandparents did that. Their parents did that. And it makes sense that I would have that pattern. And I can also, have some self-awareness around, is that working for me? And, have some self-compassion in that process. You really named both of those pieces so well. Thank you, Joanne.
NARM is just so deep. I mean, there's just so much to it. And we still study with Larry in the postmasters immersion workshops. But one of the other pieces that I think is, for me, has been so meaningful is the idea that often strategies are so difficult to break, not only because they are so deeply embedded, but because in changing or breaking those strategies, it can really threaten our sense of our relationship to our parents. And that feels life-threatening because as a child, it is life-threatening. We rely on our parents, on our caregivers. And so having that understanding can not only help us as clinicians, but hopefully help the client to have compassion for themselves about the difficulty they may be having in changing these strategies or patterns, that it's not always easy. And in fact, even when we find ourselves starting to change, this may bring a lot of discomfort and fear and dysregulation because it is new and because there's this imagined threat of losing that primary attachment relationship. So,
absolutely. Yeah, as you were talking, it brought up some thoughts for myself. I'm just thinking about how, like you said, when clients are engaging in this work, that it helps them understand themselves, that it makes sense why it would be so hard to do this work. Because I guess my brain is on like social media. You see all these therapists on social media saying, you need to set boundaries. You need to, if your mom is saying this, setting a boundary is good. And it's kind of like, okay, I'm a grown adult. I should be able to set a boundary. And we're like hitting that wall of why setting a boundary is so hard.
Exactly.
And that there's this other piece of like, that was survival.
That's right.
As a kid. And it makes sense that that's wired into us, why that would be so difficult.
And that's important. And so for our clients to really understand that and then hopefully be able to have compassion for themselves and compassion for the child consciousness You know, I think that's really an important part of the healing.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Joanne, because it is so important and so much a component of not just NARM, but I mean, it's so key to clients' understanding of their dynamics and the healing. And so I'm so glad Joanne brought that up.
Yeah. I was curious what you've learned, in your own process with complex trauma. If you have anything you would like to share about what's helped you personally or others that you would like our listeners to know about.
The things for me that's been most important through my healing with NARM therapy as a client, as well as the healing as a therapist I offer with my clients, is that relational component, the non-judgmental and even loving relationship we build. It's one of the primary things my clients, many of them say to me, is it's the first time ever they said something or did something where they didn't feel judged and shamed. And so that healing that comes from that love, that relational connection, I think there's nothing more powerful. And I've been blessed to both experience it as a client and offer it as a therapist.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, beautifully said, Lynne. And I think for me, in my own journey, it's been recognizing how long and hard it's been for me personally. And I think that has given me so much compassion and understanding for my clients, that I know that we change in increments, or we change in ways that we're ready to change. We change in ways that are safe enough at that moment. And it's this continuous journey as we grow, as our self becomes stronger, as we begin to love and accept ourselves more, we change more. It's really interesting. The more that we can accept the parts of us, the more we can see and accept the parts of us that we're not so happy with, the more we can allow a space for change and growth. And so I think my own journey, certainly education, reading, and everything we learned in grad school. I was one of those people that was in grad school going, oh my God, I have this, I have that, oh my God. And I think as clients begin to read and explore, it actually helps them in their own therapy process. As they're learning more, it helps the identifications begin to drop. And it's just a beautiful lifelong journey. And that's the shift. That in NARM, I think what I've come to realize over the years is that this is a lovely, beautiful space that we are gifted with, where we can be who we are, and we share with others this beautiful vulnerability of who they are. And we don't have that everywhere in the world. So this space is such a sacred space. And I encourage anyone who would love to become more alive, more full of joy, more just connected to themselves, connected to the world, to give NARM a try, explore NARM, because it truly is a beautiful, sacred space.
I love that. You said two things that really jumped out at me. This piece of that we change in ways that we're ready to change. Again, that's just like layered with self-compassion, as we realize when we're ready, the work is there and we'll be ready to change. And then this also just this piece that in this work, we're able to experience more aliveness, which doesn't always necessarily translate to joy. I'm finding sometimes it's like broadening my range of emotion and like being okay with all of that emotion that I like sometimes shut down certain emotions because they weren't okay to feel, but that I'm feeling more alive, even as I connect with those emotions that maybe I've shut down in the past, as I allow myself to feel them, that I do feel more alive. It's such enriching work. And so you really highlighted that, and I appreciate that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, this has just been such a pleasure to talk with both of you. I'm sure I could ask you many more questions and I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I want to respect your time. There's your book that we highlighted, Intergenerational Trauma Workbook, Strategies to Support Your Journey of Discovery, Growth, and Healing. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes for listeners that would like to access that resource. And then you have your center, but tell us the ways that listeners can find you.
Yeah, our website is traumaandbeyondcenter.com, and the and is AND. So traumaandbeyondcenter.com, and you can just Google Trauma and Beyond Center. And we're really proud of the work we're doing there. Intensive outpatient therapy, all different levels, whether it's individual or what they call IOP or PHP, 3 to 5 days a week intensive, and really integrating the model of complex trauma and love and compassion and nurturing. I mean, that's one of the prerequisites of working with us is our all have that capacity and that energy, because we wanted to create a safe space for clients who may never have ever had a safe space before. And so we are traumaandbeyondcenter.com, and you can find both Joanne and I there.
Wonderful. And your center is located, is it Sherman Oaks, California?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Great.
Thank you for having us on your show today. And I hope you can hear it in our words and tone, is that we love NARM. Mm-hmm. And dear to my heart, and part of my heart, is Larry and Brad and Marcia and all of, Aileen, and both NARM and its founders and teachers.
Thank you. Yes, I have that same excitement and joy in my heart as I hear you both talk about your journey coming to NARM and the experience that you've had in this community. Thank you for sharing that. And Joanne, did you have any words you'd like to share?
Just thank you. And it is lovely to have this opportunity to share how excited we are, how foundational NARM is for us. As I said, we continue to study NARM. It is so deep. I think there's always so much more to get out of it. And it's just become a part of who I am and how I practice, and grateful to the founders of this model because it's given me so much.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. If you're a licensed mental health practitioner, we invite you to join us for either of these Level 2 NARM therapist trainings beginning later this spring. In this training, you will learn a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach. As you are learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from this team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers. For more information about both upcoming trainings, please visit narmtraining.com/level2. That's narmtraining.com/level2. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.